go.
Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch AM from Graham. Ahead today, the brutal worldwide impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 1 million people have now fled, and as oil prices soar, the pain at the gas pump is also getting worse. A good news story from Israel. We'll have a look at the strengthening relationship between Christians and Jews in the Israeli parliament. Plus, Ukrainians getting divine help from above.
There was some kind of a lightning was starting shooting from the sky.
We'll hear from Ukraine about a pillar of fire at night and confused Russian troops. Here at home, religious leaders from different faiths working together to be prepared for possible attacks.
We're all dealing with threats of violence in churches, mosques, and synagogues. And if we don't come together and have some consistent ways of working together when these crises comes, we're in trouble.
See how this cooperation is already paid off in one hostage situation in a synagogue. All those stories and more are ahead today from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin with Russia's intensifying attacks on the civilian population of Ukraine. Several major cities are under siege, creating a humanitarian crisis. More than 1 million refugees have now fled Ukraine, the fastest exodus in this century. And here at home, gas prices are spiking as the cost of oil skyrockets. But despite the sanctions, America is still buying oil from Russia. Dale Hurd is on the story.
Ukrainian officials are now reporting more than 2,000 casualties as Russia continues to shell major cities, including civilian areas.
These aren't military targets. They are places where civilians work and families live. This is shameful.
Representative Victoria Sparks has family and friends in Ukraine.
This is barbaric and brutal to the level of unbelievable. They are bombing non-stop civilians, non-stop, from morning till night.
The International Criminal Court's prosecutor has announced an investigation into war crimes. The Russian army has reportedly taken the strategic port of Kherson, the first large Ukrainian city to fall, and have 5 major Ukrainian cities surrounded. A massive Russian convoy 17 miles north of the capital, Kyiv, seems to have stalled. The war in Ukraine also continues to push oil prices higher to more than $110 a barrel Wednesday, levels not seen since the Obama years. And it's hitting Americans squarely in the pocketbook.
The last time I filled it up was about 110. I'm going to pay right now for 30 gallons, this $120. Oh, $150. It's $5 each gallon.
Not only is our energy bill up, but our grocery bill is up. Our gas for our vehicles, that's up as well.
In his State of the Union address, Joe Biden said he would release 30 million barrels from the strategic oil reserve to bring down prices. But critics call that a small Band-Aid on a misguided energy policy that has again made America dependent on foreign oil.
You know, he's releasing 1.5 days oil supply for the United States. 1.5 days. Well, that's not a strategy.
And even as the U.S. uses economic sanctions to punish Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, America continues to indirectly fund the Russian war machine by continuing to buy Russian oil at much higher prices. Last year, the U.S. bought almost 250,000 barrels of Russian oil. At the current oil price, that's about $27 million into Russia's economy annually.
In just 13 months, we've gone from a country that was exporting oil to one that now has to depend on our enemies for our energy. That's a very dangerous predicament.
Economist Stephen Moore.
We have 250 years worth of natural gas. We have 500 years worth of coal. We have 150 years worth of oil. We're not running out of it. We just need to drill for it. And that's not happening right now. And that is unfortunately playing into the hands of our enemies.
Just last week, the White House put new restrictions on building liquefied natural gas terminals in the United States and put a moratorium on new energy leases on federal lands. And one of the first things Joe Biden did as president was to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline project. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said this week the answer to America's new energy crisis is more green energy. But it is a much more serious situation for the Ukrainian people. The UN says 1 million have fled Ukraine for neighboring nations since Russia invaded the country a week ago, setting off the fastest exodus of refugees in this century. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas is joining us now from Lviv, Ukraine. So, George, now that the Russians control the city of Kherson, what cities are they likely to target next?
Yeah, there are reports that Russian warships have left their port in Crimea and are headed to the southern city of Odessa. This is Ukraine's third largest city. It sits right on the border of Moldova. We could see some major military action there in Odessa. There are horrific reports coming out of Mariupol, which is just about east. If you look at the map of Kherson, go east, right on the Sea of Azov, on the coast of the Sea of Azov. In the last 36 hours, they've been the mayor of Mariupol said they've been constantly hit, artillery fire, missiles for the last 27 hours. My sources inside the city, they say that the electricity has been turned off. It is cold. There is no water. There is no cell connection. In essence, they have surrounded the city. And it's not just Mariupol. We're seeing it in Kharkiv. We're seeing it in portions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Clearly, the intensification in the south and the northeast continues today.
George, Russia's foreign minister says they'll continue the war in Ukraine until the end. What does victory look like for Moscow?
Yeah, there is some talk that perhaps today or tomorrow, Belarus, the Russians and the Ukrainians will meet again, just like they did a couple of days ago. But for the Kremlin, victory looks like at least the half of the country in complete Russian control, from Kyiv all the way to the east coast of the eastern portion of Ukraine and all the way to the south. I think a lot of emphasis is going to be in the next few days. It's going to be in the southern part of Ukraine. I've been saying this for the longest time, this whole idea of creating a land bridge. And what's interesting is that they are pummeling, the Russians are today pummeling areas that have been historically homes for ethnic Russians. And so this idea that Putin says that there is a quote unquote genocide happening against Russians by the Ukrainian government. Here we have Russian forces, Russian missiles targeting places like Kharkiv, like Odessa, like Mariupol. That entire quadrant of the eastern part of the country has been historically ethnic Russian, Russian speaking. And so here you have just a calamity upon calamity. And then there's this humanitarian disaster that's happening. 1 million plus people trying to get out of these places that have been surrounded.
Now, the United Nations says that more than 1 million people have fled in the last 8 days, many of them going to Lviv, where you are. How's the city coping?
You know, I mean, they've basically opened up their homes, the schools. Fortunately, it's a holiday time here for the schools. So the colleges are open, the high schools are open, restaurants are open, office spaces are open. Every place that's available for refugees, people are welcoming. We did a piece about a family that decided to open their home to strangers. This is the sort of spirit today here in Ukraine, and especially in the western part of the country, because they realize so many people are finding refuge in this particular safe zone for the moment.
All right, we continue to pray for them and you as well. Thank you, George Thomas, for reporting this morning. Much appreciated. Turning now to Israel, and far more positive story. The past 2 decades have seen a profound growth in Jewish-Christian relations. One sign of a much closer relationship is happening within Israel's parliament, the Knesset. Chris Mitchell brings us this report from Jerusalem.
Members of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus came together this week for one of the few times since the COVID pandemic began. The caucus began 18 years ago as a bridge between Israeli lawmakers and Christian groups.
The Knesset Christian Alliance Caucus has really been a beacon to the Christian world that the state of Israel wants to work with the Christian supporters of Israel, wants to develop cooperation, and it was really what started this whole movement of faith-based diplomacy, which is today the most important weapon we have in our diplomatic arsenal.
Director Josh Reinstein explains that this approach, based on common biblical values, is making a global impact.
Faith-based diplomacy is growing in leaps and bounds. We're seeing it in Latin America, we're seeing it in Asia, we're seeing it in Eastern Europe, and of course in Africa. Incredible support coming out of our network. We now have 50 Israel Allies caucuses in countries around the world, 1,200 legislators in our network, and that number is just going to go up and up as faith-based diplomacy spreads around the world.
The 8 political parties making up Israel's current coalition government, as well as members of the operation, are represented in the caucus.
I have to continue strengthening these relations. It's very important for us to find even more friends like that and to fight together for the better future of the state of Israel, of the Holy Land, and of the ties between us, Jews and Israelis, and Christian friends all around the world.
Reinstein credits evangelical Christian support for leading to the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And now the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus has a sister group in the U.S. Congress.
You know, in the States, AIPAC has been successful at bringing together people who would not sit down together otherwise. I think that the Christian Allies Caucus is kind of trying to do the same thing, but maybe on a different level. And so I think it's critically important that we support the work because that's from Israel.
I keep telling people around the world that even the existence of such a caucus is a miracle of the newborn state of Israel.
Jürgen Buehler of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem believes the caucus can help Israel both face growing threats and take advantage of global opportunities.
I believe there's still much to do for the caucus. You see anti-Semitism rising all over the world. That means there needs to be a voice which challenges that. I think the caucus is one of those voices. He can do that. And also there's a new dynamic around the world where governments are thinking to move their embassy to Jerusalem, where they're thinking to change their policies towards the state of Israel. And I think here the caucus is an ideal partner for governments all over the world to rethink their ties to Israel and to strengthen their ties.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Knesset, Jerusalem.
Coming up, are Ukrainians receiving help in their fight against the Russians? From a heavenly source, we're going to hear stories of divine intervention when we come back. A pillar of fire at night and confused Russian troops. It has some asking, are Ukrainians receiving heavenly help? On this week's episode of The Global Lane, CBN's Ukraine director explains although his fellow countrymen are showing incredible strength and resilience in the war with Russia, they're also seeing some divine intervention.
Ukrainians are surprising one another with unity, with such a level of readiness to help, to unite and stand and push back the enemy. You know, as previously our president Vladimir Zelensky, that is just, you know, he's our real Iron Man. You know, he's sitting downtown Kiev, you know, and not stepping back and he keeps coordinating war and resistance in our country. So, and as he said before, when he became a president, he said, every one of you is the president. And today he says, every one of you is a soldier. Because, like, you know, not everyone can hold a machine gun. And honestly, in many cities, people want to join the militia, the territorial defense. But authorities and army, they saying, we have enough people. You go find yourself another job, another way to help your country. And so we have more than army needs now.
Well, what are the greatest needs at this time?
Well, the greatest needs of this time is of course the continuation of the prayers and participate the informational war. And of course, and everywhere we need food, we need basic needs.
How have you seen God intervene on behalf of the Ukrainian people? What do you know? What can you share?
Well, I can share that one brother shared an audio from a brother from the church. So he says that his son he's a part of the military, and he was saying that that they were like in the dark night. They were holding their positions, and they've discovered that that a lot of Russian Federation tanks and machines coming at them, and they might struggle defending themselves. And he picks up his phone and he calls his father. He says, "Dad, you have to pray right now. We're in a situation." So his father, he rings to other members of the church. They start praying. And then later, son gives a phone call and he says, "There's some miracle happened. It looked like some spaceship, like there was like an attack from the spaceship. There was some kind of a lightning was starting shooting from the sky, and like sparks were like spreading everywhere. And then on the morning they've discovered that the whole machinery was destroyed. So they, like all of those soldiers, they thought maybe it was done by some kind of a weapon that we didn't know about, or it was just God's intervention."
Wow.
So, and there was another occasion that we just got from our friend that we know in person. We were praying that they would start resisting each other, that enemy would resist the enemy, because we know there were several biblical occasions like this, that when God was doing this. And another part of the Russian army, they occupied one little town, and they've removed flags from the town's government buildings. They attached those flags to their tanks, and they started to ride. And eventually, at the dark in the evening, they met the first group of the tanks, and so they thought they are enemies to each other, and they started shooting into each other.
Finally, then, I just want to know, how should we pray for you, your family, other CBN workers there, and the people of Ukraine? What should we pray?
Well, please pray that we could hear God in this time. That we would be able to have the most deficit thing in the world, like in our country now. It's the peace in our hearts. That our God, who is the Prince of Peace, would grant the peace in our hearts, and that in this condition of the peace, we could just see the ways how we can build the kingdom in the times of war, that we could be the light and the warmth and the love and the hand of God to other people who in need. Because some of us stay in Kiev, some of us stay right outside of Kiev, some of us took our families across the border, and men stayed there, and like we all want to be the hands of God. So pray that we would be active members of body of Christ in this time, that we would not just sit and be afraid and full of fear for our lives, that we would be productive in building the kingdom.
For a look at other trends and news and developments around the world, be sure to watch The Global Lane. You can find it on the CBN News Channel this evening at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. You can also download the CBN News app and watch it on demand. Still ahead, members of different faiths working together for the common good. We'll tell you how that came about and what's ahead for them right after this. In the aftermath of January's Texas synagogue shooting, a behind-the-scenes example of cooperation between different faith groups is coming to light. As senior national affairs correspondent Heather Sells shows us, a Southern Baptist pastor brought a Muslim imam together with law enforcement to assist during the standoff.
The crisis came and they needed help. I could respond. And so it was basically purely because of the relationships.
The recent synagogue attack in North Texas brought together leaders from 3 faiths who already had forged relationships. This multi-faith bridge building is helping to advance the well-being of our country's growing diverse communities.
For more than 20 years, Southern Baptist pastor Bob Roberts has sought to be a peacemaker, seeking out Islamic, Jewish, and other faith leaders worldwide to work for the common good. The effort paid off in his own backyard January 15th when a gunman took a rabbi and 3 others hostage in a nearby synagogue. Roberts began working his network, quickly calling on a local imam to come to the scene.
I explained to them that this man could de-escalate the situation like no one else. And so it enabled us to get him in the room with us, and we were able to work scenarios. At the same time, the rabbi's family was there in the room, so we were with them, giving them comfort. It was all about relationships.
After a 10-hour siege, the hostages escaped as the FBI shot and killed the gunman.
Colleyville's one of the safest cities in Texas.
Authorities say the gunman demanded the release of a Pakistani scientist convicted of trying to kill U.S. troops in Afghanistan and serving her sentence near Colleyville. They also report the gunman made anti-Semitic statements. Colleyville is just the latest in a resurgence of hate crimes in the U.S., specifically anti-Semitism. It's one more reason why Roberts says this work is so important.
We're all dealing with threats of violence in churches, mosques, and synagogues. And if we don't come together and have some consistent ways of working together when these crises comes, we're in trouble.
The attack and Roberts' role may well spur interest in this approach. Registration has spiked for a multi-faith forum in March that will bring together high-profile pastors, rabbis, and imams.
If these efforts continue to expand, proponents say they could help to build stronger communities. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Heather, thank you. We'll be right back right now with an encouraging word for your day. Stay with us. It is time now for your Thursday Thankful, and today I hope you'll join me in this prayer of gratitude. Father, I thank you for your grace and your mercy. They are new every morning, and they are more than sufficient for the day. With this prayer of thanksgiving, I hope you will make this Thursday, today, a day filled with gratitude. That posture opens the door for more. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch. Remember, you can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us at the address right there at the bottom of your screen. It's newswatch@cbn.com. And, of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.